Hello and welcome to Bristol Botanical Gardens. I'm here today filming for Festival of Nature and I'm going to be speaking to some of the researchers that work here. So we're going to have a look at how plants work with bumblebees, learn a little bit more about bat echolocation and also meet some of the rare and endangered species that are native to Avon Gorge. So Daniel, we know that pollination is really important for pollinators themselves, it's important for flowers, and it's really important for us. You know, nearly 30% of all of our food relies on pollination. So how do pollinators, you work with bumblebees, how do bees actually find and organize themselves to find flowers?
What's important to pollinators is to be efficient. They don't want to spend too much time finding the flowers. So on the other side, for flowers, it is really important to be attractive to bees. They want to look pretty to attract the bees. And to do so, they actually have nice colors and have nice shapes. They smell nice and they can attract bees from different distances. So what is happening there is this relationship between the pollinator and the flower, which is beneficial to both. How bees organize themselves is the key question. How do they know that a flower is there to be pollinated and to get rewards from, to get resources from?
So what happens when a bee gets closer to a flower? How can they tell if that's the right one for them?
So the smell will be very important at a longer distance because smells go all around. We humans can smell many flowers, but bees can smell many more fragrances from flowers. So we are poor with that respect. Bees are really good at this. So they will start to identify the readiness of some flowers. And then they will start to identify flowers by their colors and their shape as they get closer and closer. But there is a wealth of information that the bee needs to gather before taking the decision to basically land on that flower and try to get the nectar, try to get the pollen that they will go back to the hive and feed their larvae with, and feed themselves, of course, as well. So a complicated system which is beneficial to both.
So what happens if a bee approaches a flower that's got no nectar, no pollen left?
Well, indeed, that can happen because many bees are going to go to the same patch, basically. So how do they know whether there is nectar or not? And that has an analogy, actually, which is that of a supermarket. If you go to that supermarket and you want your half pint of semi-skimmed organic milk, and for the third time in a row you don't find it, you start to be a bit disappointed. You would think that, okay, you were making an effort for no reward. Bees are exactly the same with flowers. So this is part of the problem they have, is to be efficient and not waste time going to find their resources.
So how can the bees tell exactly which flowers? I mean, can the flowers actually communicate to the bees? They can pop up a sign like a supermarket saying, hey, we're fully stocked, you can come here.
Well, it's a great question because the flower cannot change its color very quickly.
No.
If you take the nectar away from the flower or the pollen, the flower doesn't change its color very fast. So it cannot go from green to red in a traffic light system.
Yeah.
That would be simple. That's not the case. It can stop emitting scent, but not that quickly either. So we came to the effect that when a bee goes and lands on the flower, we observe that some pollen is actually jumping from the flower to the bee. And that had been observed for a long time.
Yeah.
And that means that there is some sort of force, which is an electrostatic force.
Yeah.
And we could measure that. So that electrostatic force will actually be enhancing the capacity for the flower to delegate its pollen grains to that bee so that the next flower can get pollinated. That's the whole joke for the flower. That's what they want to do.
So that's what the flowers get out of it.
The flowers get that out of it. But the electric field being built between the bee and the flower will be important. Because bees are positively charged, imagine my thumb is a bee, and they go towards the flower, this positive charge will have an interaction with that flower as to create a negative charging there, to enhance that negative charging. And when we speak about positive and negative, we actually talk about a tiny little force that is generated, an electric field. And this is this electric field that will help carry the pollen from the flower to the bee. So it enhances the capacity of flowers to actually shed their pollen and pollinize the bee, if you want.
So the pollen can jump from the flower to the bee.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Exactly.
So Marc, we're here in the most amazing glasshouse, and actually there's one species in particular that you're keen to show me.
Okay, so we've got a cactus here. It's of the genus Epiphyllum. There are several species. Here's the flower. And they use different types of pollinators. And one type of pollinator they like to use is bats, echolocating bats. And that is what makes them interesting to me, because I want to understand how these flowers that are nice and red for us, what color do they give to an echolocating bat in the sound that it back scatters? So is there such a thing as color in echo?
And is there?
Well, we can investigate the echo characteristics coming off these surfaces.
Yeah.
You can see they're smooth and waxy, and that is a common principle, which means they produce strong echoes. So if anything, they're producing loud, strong echoes, which attracts the bat.
So at night, the bat can hear where the flower is.
Exactly.
Wow. And what does the flower get out of this relationship with the bat?
Well, the bat would insert the head here, then the pollen will get stuck on the chin, and it brings it to the next plant, and that way it cross-fertilizes between plant individuals. So bats are fantastic pollen vectors.
Brilliant. So we've talked there a little bit about how the smooth surfaces will reflect a lot of the echolocation, but actually some other creatures will use the exact opposite, won't they? You've got something to show me, haven't you?
Okay, so the other thing that I'm really interested in, but which is the other end of the spectrum, is insects that don't want to be found by echolocating bats. So how do you achieve the opposite to what the flower wants to achieve? And that is by not reflecting echoes. We call that acoustic camouflage. And we've just discovered some amazing little features that some of moth species have evolved. So I've brought a few in here, in this box here. So this is a North American species, and they have this fine dust on their wings. And these are scales, like little flattened hairs. That's the dust that comes off when you touch a butterfly or a moth. And they have remarkable acoustic properties that gives these moths something that we call a stealth cloak. So when they're in flight, the echoes bouncing off them are so faint that the bat has difficulty detecting them. So they fly invisible on the biosonar.
It's fantastic. And if you just look at them to the untrained eye, they actually look really furry, don't they?
Exactly. It's all in the furriness. So on the body, let me just take one out for you. See what they look like. So here we go. Let's hope they're not too active and fly off straight away. So here, this is the beautiful Automoris, and we startled it, so it's exposing its beautiful hind wing eye spots.
Wow.
Usually they're camouflage, but now it knows that we're doing something to it. It thinks we're a predator, wants to scare us. And the body is covered in this thick fur, which is also an ultrasound absorber. But what we are really interested in is the wings. You can see the wing has a really thin layer of scales only, and evolution has turned these scales into what we call resonant absorbers.
Okay.
Now, this is from a biological perspective, that's fantastic. But what makes this even more amazing is that these wings have abilities to absorb sound that far surpass anything we have in terms of sound absorbers for our homes and offices.
Oh, wow.
So what we do is we work on a project where we try to understand the biophysics of these sound absorbers, and if we crack that and turn that into the human audible hearing range, we can produce sound absorbers that are much thinner, factor 10 thinner than what we have currently. Gosh. So we're talking sound absorber wallpaper.
Wow, amazing.
So this is warning coloration, and now we've annoyed it. It will fly off, so I better put it back in the cage now. So now I've touched this moth, and you can see that my fingers have this fine yellow dust on them.
Yes.
And these are tiny little scales. They're fractions of a millimeter in size. And if you scale them up, they look like this.
Oh, wow.
So this is a tiny section of the membrane, flight membrane in black here, of these wings. And on top, they have these scales, all individual, each one with its own color. And this fantastic acoustic stealth cloak that we discovered is based on these scales. So when I shake this, you can see that they all resonate and wobble.
Yes.
And sound does the same thing.
Yeah.
So when a bat's cries hit this wing, they start to vibrate, and whenever they vibrate, they absorb sound. Now, the whole consortium, this canopy of scales together, absorbs all the frequencies that bats are using.
Oh, wow.
And it's also, if you look at it, it's not very thick. So this is about 1/3 of a millimeter in thickness in real life, but it is very absorbent. So it absorbs 70–80% of all the acoustic energy. So it really shrinks the moth's echo signature to something much smaller than it actually is, and the bat might fly past without noticing it. And that's the adaptive advantage of this amazing stealth cloak.
Fantastic. So it's very effective in stopping bat predation.
super effective in stopping predation and acoustically much more effective than anything we have.
Fantastic. So Nick, we're in the part of the Botanical Gardens now, which celebrates all of our rare local native flora. What is it? Why are we so interested, and why is it so important to care about everything that's on our doorstep?
Well, it's really important. I mean, the UK's lost a lot of plant biodiversity since the Second World War through intensification of agriculture and habitat loss. And locally to the Bristol area, we're really lucky. We've got some really unique habitats very close to Bristol and even in Bristol. And within those habitats live some very, very special plants.
So we're really close to the Avon Gorge here, aren't we? That's a really inhospitable, very steep-sided valley. So how has that contributed to the diversity of plants that we've got here?
Well, the Avon Gorge was formed as part of the process of the end of the last ice age through meltwater dissolving the soft limestone through slightly acid water. So the formation of the gorge is really unique because the different rock faces facing different aspects create different micro or microclimates, and that allows different plant species to survive. And in the case of some of the species we have in the Avon Gorge, they're at the furthest northwest of their European range. So Bristol's is about as far northwest as they're going to go. And so really the gorge for some of the species is, we describe it as a refuge.
Wow. So what role does the university and the Botanical Gardens have in preserving or conserving some of these rare species that we've got?
The University of Bristol Botanic Garden has grown and has propagated some of these rare and threatened native species to the Bristol area for the last 50, almost 60 years. And examples of them have been growing in the Botanic Garden in specially constructed ecological displays for visitors to come and see, enjoy and learn about, and us for also to sort of introduce them to the large influx of students which arrive in Bristol each autumn from all over the UK and overseas. So they can also learn about these as part of their sort of formal studies. And for many of those species, it's easier to see them here in the Botanic Garden than it is to sort of don a harness and a rope and an abseil off a cliff to go and see them in the wild.
Definitely.
So here is part of our public engagement, and the garden has 4 core collections, and rare and threatened native plant species to the Bristol area and the Southwest Peninsula is one of those core collections.
So can you show me some of the plants?
Yeah, shall we go and have a look?
Yeah.
Okay. So Emma, this is the famous Sorbus Bristoliensis here on a very windy day, but you can see the flower buds beginning to form here.
Oh, yes.
As the weather warms up later in May, these are going to open up into creamy white flowers. Sorbus are members of the rose family, and they're very easily accessible to a whole wide range of pollinators. So this will be covered in native pollinators, and if the temperature is good, then we should get some pollination and fertilization taking place, and that'll be followed by a nice russet coloured fruit in the instance of Sorbus Bristoliensis. But this plant evolved in the Avon Gorge long time ago, and it's unique to Bristol. And white beams are called, partly the name is referred to because of the white hairs on the back of the leaves,
Wow.
which in strong sunlight, as the leaves blow around, give the trees a silver white sheen, and that's what gives it its common name, white beam.
Of course, only seen in the gorge or here at the Botanical Gardens.
This particular tree, yes. So we're in this part of the display, which is devoted to actual plants of the Avon Gorge and Lee Wood, so really local to us. And we're growing many unique plants, and I want to show you this small plant which actually has finished flowering. It flowers in February, March, but it's now in fruit, and it's got these long seed pods on it. This is a plant in the cabbage family, and it's called Arabis scabra. That's its botanical name, but its common Bristol name is the Bristol rockcress. And this is an example of a plant that is at the furthest northwest of its European distribution. So it only grows in the Avon Gorge in Bristol.
Wow.
Elsewhere in Europe, it's found in upland areas of central and then southern Europe. But here, this plant also is a relic from when the climate in Bristol was much cooler soon after the last ice age. So it grows in the Avon Gorge. The gorge is actually a refuge for this plant to grow there. But another plant, this plant here is called honewort, Its botanical name is Trinia Glorca, and this is not endemic to the gorge in any shape or form. And in fact, its European distribution is from Turkey westwards to Portugal, and then north across Europe and to southern Britain. But change of land use has meant that most populations for this in southern Britain have now disappeared.
Oh.
And there's a very small population in the Avon Gorge. It used to be found in 5 or 6 sites in the Avon Gorge, but they've become overcrowded by alien or weed species that have been either deliberately or inadvertently introduced to the gorge, and they've grown and smothered the populations of this plant. So we're growing these plants at the moment from seed, from plants already growing in the Botanic Garden, and we're growing hundreds of these to build up what's called an ex situ population that we can continue to flower and produce seed from. And we're talking with partners between the university and the Avon Gorge and Downs Wildlife Project about the possibility of introducing these to help bolster the native population, because this plant is under threat of extinction in the Avon Gorge.
Brilliant. So we've got another species here which is only found in the Avon Gorge in the UK anyway, haven't we?
Yes, this is, its common name is the Bristol onion or round-headed leek, and it is a species of onion. Its botanical name is Allium spherocephalum, and we see the description of this plant in the species name, Spherocephalum. Sphero means round, cephalum means head, hence its other common name, the round-headed leek. And this is an example of a plant that grows from Turkey all the way across the Mediterranean and Central Europe, right up through the south, the western side of France. And when we were once connected to mainland Europe, this plant was able to migrate across, and at some point it's arrived in the Avon Gorge. We've lost our land bridge with mainland Europe, the climate has changed, and the biology of the landscape has changed. And so this plant has been shaded out, and it only now grows in very sunny rock ledges in the Avon Gorge here in Bristol. So it's another example of the gorge being a refuge for this particular species. It's not introduced by mankind, it arrived of its own volition, and it's a very rare UK plant, and it's very easy for people to see it and enjoy it here, much easier than going to its sites where they might actually, possibly hurt themselves or damage the fragile ecology. So it's a great example of our public engagement, which we try to do here at the University Botanic Garden.
No, it's brilliant. And thank you so much for showing me around today and telling me a little bit more about some of our local flora.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. We've got a really exciting flora in Bristol, and we really like sharing knowledge about it.
Next time we'll go out in the harnesses into the gorge, I think.
Yeah, let's do that.